Our next keynote speaker is Frederick Brown. Fred Brown is the Deputy Executive Director of Learning Forward, where he designed and now facilitates the Learning Leaders for Learning Schools program. Previously, he served as a senior program official for the Wallace Foundation, where he guided the work of several major grantees. His expertise is grounded in real-world experience as a teacher and school leader. Please join me in welcoming Fred Brown.
Thank you. So you remember my story this morning about the kindergarten child in first grade? Remember how that story ended with okay, you remember that story, so I don't have to go into that. So imagine being the last person after the brilliance, and let's one more round of applause for Hank Smith, okay? And then the virtual incredibleness, if that's a word, of Dr. Linda Darling Hammond. And then Stephanie Rome and that amazing conversation that still has me thinking, so I can't even think about what I'm about to say. So one more round of applause for Stephanie. And so imagine you're the person who's on after the three of them. And you want to say to yourself, who and sign me up for this? But here's what I'm doing. I'm trying not to introduce any new ideas. What I'm trying to do is give you time and space to do something with the ideas that you got. Because the thing that we don't do most often, and you heard me say this morning when it comes to professional learning, is if I ask you, and I will later, what was a powerful professional learning experience, I hope you'll connect it to, well, here's what it helped me do back in my system. So at Learning Forward, we do believe that every child deserves access to excellent teaching and learning every day. That is the equity issue, and that's the way we think about the work that we do, and it frames all the work that we do. And I want to ask you to take a look at this picture, and does anybody recognize who's in this picture? I heard one person say it. I want to see if anyone else recognizes who's in this picture. So quiet in the room, isn't it? What was that one guess? Wilma Rudolph. So Wilma Rudolph, what do you know about Wilma Rudolph? Very quickly or very loudly? Track star, which, yep, absolutely. There you go. A little bit of history of Wilma Rudolph. In that picture behind Wilma Rudolph is another lady, and that is my Aunt Vivian. And Vivian Brown was a track star at East Technical High School, and she and my dad and 12 other brothers and sisters all lived in the projects of Cleveland, Ohio. And there was a teacher who saw the talent that Vivian Brown had and encouraged her to go into track. And she became the track star that was that close to coming behind this amazing track star that everyone knows, Wilma Rudolph. Now, when I think back to my own experience in school, I also tried track. It didn't go as well. How many of you know the 800 race? Okay, so I tried the 800 first, and I was in the 800, and I remember it was so bad that the race was over, or they thought it was. And all of a sudden they looked out and they're like, oh, wait a minute, is there somebody else? There's still somebody else out there. Wait a minute, get the hurdles off. And that was me coming around that last corner. So I realized the 800 was not my race, but the hurdles was my race. Because for me, a teacher saw that I had another skill, these long legs, and I could get over those hurdles. And so part of what I hope that you're taking away from all the conversations today is the power of the single teacher and making a life-changing difference for a child, and how important this responsibility is for all of us as educators. And so very quickly, here's our vision statement as an organization. Here's what we believe: equity and excellence in teaching and learning. And I want you to think about, for just a quick moment, the most powerful after today. After today, what is the most powerful professional learning experience you've ever had over the last few years? Please have that conversation in your table group. What was the most powerful professional learning experience you had over the last few years? Go. Sorry, I won't put the mic on.
But this was really in depth in it, not only so what your traits are, but also how you think and also how you act.
If you would for a second, pause your conversation and add this element to the conversation, and that is, what made it so powerful? You've talked about that already. Tell your table mates what you've done now as a result of the experiences that you just shared. What has happened back in your school, back in your district, back in your office, back in whatever, as a result of that experience that you just shared. So continue the conversation, but now talk about what happened as a result. Take another 20 seconds. And we'll come back together in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So what I'm hoping came out of your conversations is the fact that you were able to articulate the link between that professional learning experience and what changed in terms of practice back in your schools, back in your district office, back wherever it is that you work. Because if you weren't able to make that connection, it goes back to what we were saying this morning. A professional learning experience can be wonderful. I can leave feeling energized. I can be happy. I can be excited. But if I don't do anything to change my practice, if I don't sustain the practices connected to that, then did the professional learning truly make a difference? And the one thing that we don't want to do is just scratch the surface when it comes to our learning and these types of experiences. So many of you may know my friend Beatrice, and she's an example of someone who just scratches the surface. On the computer, before you hit the video, if you make sure that the volume's turned up, because I can't remember the level where I left it. Oh, it's going to be loud. All right, so Beatrice, possibly scratching the surface.
Instead of mailing everyone my vacation photos, I'm saving a ton of time by posting them to my wall.
Ooh, I like that one.
It's so quick. It's just like my car insurance. I saved 15% in just 15 minutes.
I saved more than that in half the time.
I'd unfriend you.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
15 minutes for a quote isn't how it works.
All right, we'll hit
With
pause on the
insurance,
video.
7.5 minutes could save you on car insurance. Welcome to the modern world.
Thank you. I promise I'm not trying to sell you insurance. But this is what happens when we just scratch the surface when it comes to our learning. We end up like Beatrice. So we use the terms, we use the words, but we don't internalize the ideas. And so as a result, we go back, and I'll share with you, I've worked in a district, and it's not the Fort Wayne Community Schools, by the way, which is in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is an amazing district. Dr. Wendy Robinson has done some great work. But I was working in another district where we introduced some big ideas, and some of the surface level components of those ideas were taken back. And let me tell you, we can do way more damage and harm than good when we take just the surface level of what we get from these kinds of experiences and say we're going to go back and implement. You heard a lot of ideas today. lots of ideas today. And so my question is, how do we create a professional learning system that just, for one of those ideas, just maybe one of those ideas, at most two, because you heard probably 138 new ideas today alone. And there's no way you're going to go back and implement every single one of those ideas in any significant way. But if we don't go back and introduce some sort of learning structure so that some of those ideas get taken up, then this experience that you just had today was not worth the time that it could be if we could come up with a structure to implement. So here's the conversation at your tables, and this is really important, so I would ask you to take this seriously. You had something that you learned that was new today. There are many things that you may have heard that you knew about that, or at least you heard about it before, but there were some things that were absolutely brand new. From what you learned, what is one idea or one component that you want to take back to your staff, back to your school, back to your colleagues? And so think about that one piece so that you can be mindful right now of how you can do something with that nugget. And then here's what's really critical. What else do you need to learn or do in order to make use of some of these new ideas? Because we can't assume that in the short time that you heard them today that you're ready to go off and running. So what is it what's the extra thing that you need to do? Perhaps is go and get to the articles that were referenced. Do some background reading on something that you saw. So have that conversation with your group. But here's what I'm asking each of you to do is to have your own personal written statement, because I'm going to actually come out and ask, not volunteers, I'm just going to walk up to people and say, read what you have. Your actual written statement that has some of the answers to these questions. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to have this conversation because I think it's that important to think very carefully and critically about the piece that you want to take back and do something with most immediately. What questions do you have before I give you the 5 minutes to have this conversation at your table and do that internal reflection? All right, that 5 minutes begins now. So I have my first table volunteer. They were voluntold that they had to have one person come from their group and share some responses. Who's our person? It's going to be Brady. Brady, you're on.
So I wrote down that what I'm really interested in is to learn how specific learning communities create high trust relationships and how this might vary in different contexts and different environments. And so I'm just interested in learning more about the research there, reading more scholarship on creating trust and how that connects to learning communities.
Thank you, Brady. Did anyone else talk about or write down about trust and anything connected to what Brady just said? If you would please just put your hand up in the air. Brady, would you look around and just see some of the other people who are interested in this topic? Because I think, again, as a collective, this might be a conversation that you may want to have with some of your colleagues. I'm going to that table over there in the front. It's a yellow table, so they see that I'm coming. And this is where I'm going to ask for my next volunteer who just could respond to one of these. So table in the front. That's you. Who's it going to be? They're all pointing to other people. Okay, who do I have? What's the name? Okay, there you go. What's their name? Alan it is. Okay, go for it.
All right, so I want to share with my staff the continuum of listening to make it a goal of my own to be more of an active and compassionate listener towards everyone in my life, especially students, and challenge them to do the same with their own students. But I need to develop a way to present it that is meaningful and authentic, maybe come up with a personal story of my own to connect to it.
Thank you. Anyone else choose listening as their, so again, there are people who are engaged and interested in some of the same things that you are. The goal here is you've been thoughtful now about what it is that you want to take back. And there's so many ways to think about this. I'm not going to go through all of these slides because we're at that point where we need to hit some of the big ideas first. And as you think about, Alan, your design for how to share these ideas, I'll remind you of this video right here, which we won't show the whole video. I'll tell you when to stop the video. But this video, I think, helps us think about how difficult it is to change practice. That's all I'll say, and let's just look at the video for a few moments.
Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. You've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something. I did something that damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill, and I was really proud of it. Everything changed, though, when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses, and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle, and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Salem. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go, the better. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels. Every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences, and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this. For instance, this guy, I offered him $200 just to ride this bike 10 feet across the stage. Everybody thought he could do it.
No, you didn't understand. You didn't understand. So, this way. All right, so, whenever you're ready. Wait. No, you have to keep your feet on. All right, here we go. Like, you gotta start rolling at least. And go. Right back up. Okay. Keep your feet on the pedal. Go. Go right on. Just keep your feet on the pedals. Tails on. Yeah, come on. All right, one more time.
Once you have a rigid way of thinking in your head, sometimes you cannot change that, even if you want to. So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm and I would wreck. But at least I could ride it. My son is the closest person to me genetically, and he's been riding a normal bike for 3 years. That's over half his life. I wanted to know how long it would take him to learn how to ride a backwards bike, so I told him if he learned how to ride a backwards bike, he could go with me to Australia and meet a real astronaut. Are you going to give up?
No.
Go ahead. This is how it starts. Look at this. This is such a big deal. Get up, you got it. Did you see his brain get it? So he, in, how many weeks have we been doing this? 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, he did something that took me 8 months to do, which demonstrates that a child has more neuroplasticity, am I even saying that right, than an adult. It's clear from this, hey, it's me, Destin.
All right, so that video is one that anybody in this room can download and get access to. I used to say you could Google that, Google backwards bicycle, and if you Google backwards bicycle and Smarter Every Day, you could find that. I used to say Google. Then I was at a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funded meeting, and it was suggested that I say, or use the search engine of your choice. So whatever search engine you use, find that video. But here's the point. What does this have to do with what we're talking about in terms of changing practice? What does this have to do with professional learning? What does this have to do with the challenges that we face when it comes to bringing ideas like the ones you had here back to your school? So if we had more time, you'd have a table conversation about this, but just a few points. One, it takes time. It takes lots of time to change practice. And so what happens often is we go back, we say to our staff, or we'll say to, if you're a principal, your staff just knows when you go to professional learning because you come back with all these new ideas, quote unquote, and we don't give people time to process those new ideas. We don't give people time to practice. How long did he practice riding this bike? 8 months. For 8 months, did he have sort of this intrinsic desire to do it? Absolutely. Did he realize that early on that just knowing how to control the bike wasn't enough? Absolutely. And even with that, it took him 8 months to ride the bike, or at least become comfortable. By the way, you can always tell where you are in the country when you laugh at certain things. Half of America doesn't necessarily know what a mullet is. You do here, because there was quite the response to the mullet. And then the other half of the country, when the young kid falls down, he's like, get up. There's some people in the country like, oh, that's just wrong. And then there are parts of the country like you all who just laugh. So I'm just saying, you can kind of tell where you are in the country based on the reaction to the video. But again, the bigger point here is, how do we create a professional learning experience that mimics what he did, which was he had this internal desire to ride this bike. He cared enough about this outcome that he was going to stick with it. But even with that, do you remember what happened if his cell phone went off? He talked about the slightest distraction send him backwards. And I want you to think about your professional learning experiences. Think about how you change practice. Think about the new big idea that comes to your school. All it takes is the slightest distraction. And all of a sudden, people revert back to their old practices. So how do we pay attention to these things in the work that we want to do?
Hey, it's me, Destin.
So again, it takes a long time to change practice. And some of you are probably familiar with this whole notion of kasab. And I'll bring this up as a way to think about the work that we're going to talk about in just a sec. There's lots of things that you learned today. They become the knowledge that you might want to share. But if I drop down to the S, what kind of skills do I need to apply the knowledge that I just sort of got during these last few hours? Because sometimes it takes a certain level of skill to apply something that you've learned, and if you don't have both the knowledge and the skill, then the ideas kind of die on the vine. If I were taking some of these ideas back to my school, how do I pay attention to the attitude of my staff? Do they come at this with, I'm really excited to learn what you learned during that event that you went to? Or is their attitude, oh, here we go. Here she comes back with some new ideas. What are we going to have to do next? So how do we think about creating an atmosphere where the attitude is positive? And then there's the aspiration. If your school buys into this notion that every child can learn, that every teacher can change practice, that we can all work as a collective to get this work done, do we have the aspiration to engage in this new learning? But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters to me is, do behaviors change in a way that aligns to these new ideas? Because if the behaviors if they don't change, then everything that we went through was for naught. So I'm going to give you a moment at your tables once again. The idea that you want to take back to your staff, this new learning that you want to share with them, I'd like you to take it through the kasab. I'd like you to think about, what is the knowledge that you want folks to have as a result of this experience that you had? I want you to think about, how will you pay attention to their attitudes and aspirations? How will you help them think about the skills that they need to actually apply these ideas? And ultimately, what behaviors do you hope will change as a result of this new idea and this new learning? So going through the kasab and paying attention to the B with the idea that you were working with before. And as you'll know on the schedule, we're going until about 3, and all these table conversations that you're having, these are the table conversations that we want you to have and be able to actually enter into the Google Doc some of these big ideas. So particularly at this point, my Google Doc person, please take some of these ideas and type them into the Google Doc itself. working through the CASAB. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. So again, the conversations that you're having and the document that you're working through, the entire point of this is for you to actualize your learning. That is the whole point of the work that we're doing at this point. And so if we had more time, we would have lots of conversation about the difference between training and professional learning. And of course, those of you in Washoe County are all about professional learning. We also would have time to talk more about some of the research that's out there, including any John Hattie fans in the room. Okay, so a couple of us in the John Hattie camp. And when he talks about the effect size and what we should be paying attention to, we've heard a lot of this conversation today about certain things matter more than other things in terms of what we can do with our time. On the left side, if you remember this research, anything with a 0.40 effect size or lower was something that Hattie would say, don't do as much of these things. Doesn't mean you should never do them, but if you're going to focus your limited time and attention, focus them in the areas that make the most difference. And when you look at these, particularly when you look at this last one, which has a negative effect size, I think it goes to it just speaks volume to what your superintendent said this morning around, we got to stop doing the things not only that aren't helping kids, but when it comes to retention, that are actually harming children. But when we look on the other side, look at these. So we're talking about an effect size of 0.29 for homework, and on the right side, student expectations are 1.44, then we want to make sure that our kids know we have very high expectations for them. But at the very top was this whole notion of teacher collective efficacy, which, as we were hearing from Stephanie, the power of the collective. When teachers work together to talk about their practice, that's where you get a huge effect size of 1.57. We heard this also from Linda Darnley-Hammond just earlier today when she said if teachers would spend, what did she say? Actually, that should be 10 to 20 hours a week collaborating. That's what we see in high-performing countries, 10 to 20 hours a week collaborating. If we had time to talk about the standards for professional learning, which I won't go into right now, but you know that those were released in 2011, and what I'm happy about is in Nevada, when those standards were released, you paid attention to not just the standards that were there, which I think is awesome, but you also paid attention to equity and cultural competence, and those became additional standards in this state. That's a huge deal, because what you're saying as a state is we believe that there are standards that can define how professional learning looks and how we pay attention to it and how we create the conditions for it in our schools, and we're going to pay attention to those last few. I won't go through the standards right now. I'm going to flash through those. But you also, I hope, pay attention to the work of Gusky and others who say, how do we measure the impact of our professional learning experiences? And it was Gusky who would say, yes, it's important to pay attention to the learning that happens. So if I look at this model and go all the way back to the bottom of the model, Gusky would say, if people had a great reaction to the experience, that's really good. If people on the rating form said, I'm going to give everything a high five, that's awesome. If people are excited that the food was good, perfect. But we start to go up a little bit and we say what we really are interested in are people learning something during those experiences. And if we go up one more level, I think what we're really interested in is, does their organization change as a result of what they learned in some significant way? Will your school change? Will this district change as a result of what you experienced today? And then Gusky would say, if that all happens, are you paying attention to whether or not practice, teacher practice, leader practice, are you paying attention to those changes in any significant way? And are people using the ideas that came from this experience? But ultimately, it all boils down to what's on the top. The student learning change as a result of this experience. And so thinking about making those connections becomes really important. And there are lots of ways to pay attention to that. Put your hands up if you've experienced any professional learning around the PDSA cycle. I'm hoping lots of hands go up because I believe as a county district, this is something you've thought about as a way to test ideas to see if they in fact change practice. And so as you think about how you engage in the kind of learning that happens in your school to test whether or not these ideas have changed practice, there's so many strategies out there. PDSA is simply one of them. So in the last few minutes that we have, and this is back in the Google form that you have, this is what I would ask you to do. You have actually 4 minutes. After everything you heard today, these are the questions I would ask you to answer at your table. What questions or wonderings do you have? And why this is important for the Google form is because it can inform the next learning that this collective has. So please put the answer to that question in the Google form. What concerns you? And then back to your own problem of practice or the idea that you're going to take back to your school. Are there any structural or procedural changes that you're considering? And how will you know whether or not the professional learning that you're suggesting will make a difference in practice? I know 4 minutes is not long enough to have this conversation, but I ask you to start it at your tables and please record it in the Google form. In closing, let me say this. We'll come back together. So I just want you to know before I leave this conversation, and of course I have the opportunity to be with the district folks tomorrow as well, if someone were to ask me, do you have hope for the children of Washoe County? Do you have hope that teachers will change their practice and that they will meet the learning needs of each and every one of those children? And do you have hope that principals care so much about their children and the children that they serve that they would be willing to do anything and everything to meet those children's needs? The reason I would say absolutely yes is because I paid attention to the fact that you all have been focused and engaged in your learning today from the moment that you arrived to this very moment right now. And I want to say thank you to the work that you're doing. Thank you for making a difference in the lives of children in this county. And thank you for welcoming me to Nevada. There you go. Thank you.